The Japanese destroyer's searchlight swept across the black waves like a blade of death. It missed our bow by only a few feet. Every man aboard froze, engines cut, hearts pounding, drifting in silence off the coast of Vella La Vella. 23 sailors of PT-164 pressed themselves flat against the deck, praying the enemy wouldn't spot us. Just beyond that destroyer, 3 massive Japanese transports pushed steadily through the night, their holds packed with nearly 8,000 soldiers bound for the island of Kolombangara. None of them knew their journey would end tonight, swallowed by the dark waters of the Solomon Sea. The date was July 19, 1943. In 4 minutes, we'd turn that darkness into hellfire. My hands clutched the twin 50-caliber machine guns so tightly my knuckles ached. Beside me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg murmured coordinates to our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPherson. The faint green glow from our compass was the only light we dared show. Behind us, hidden in the shadow of Vella La Vella's volcanic peaks, 2 more boats, PT-168 and PT-171, waited for our signal. We were America's secret weapons, and the Japanese Navy was about to learn that the night no longer belonged to them. My name is Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan, U.S. Navy Reserve. I was one of the first men to prove that small wooden boats could destroy steel warships. People ask what it felt like to be part of one of the Navy's most closely guarded secrets of 1943. The truth is, we didn't think about history. We were too busy trying not to die. If we failed tonight, those 8,000 soldiers would reach Kolombangara and butcher American troops fighting to seize its airfield. Every torpedo aboard represented hundreds of American lives that might be saved. Every Japanese ship we sank meant families back home who'd never receive a telegram beginning with, "We regret to inform you." To understand how 3 boats smaller than most private yachts could take on the Imperial Japanese Navy at the height of its power, you have to know what we were up against. The Japanese had turned night fighting into an art form. Since their devastating victory at Savo Island, they ruled the darkness of the Solomons. Their sailors had spent years mastering night combat, fighting without radar, using only keen eyes and flawless coordination. They called their nocturnal supply runs the Tokyo Express. We called them the Rat Run. Either way, once the sun went down, they moved with impunity. America had the bigger fleet, better radar, and heavier guns. But in the darkness, we were blind. Our admirals, trained in the great daylight battles of Jutland and Manila Bay, struggled to adapt. Our cruisers and destroyers, designed for open ocean engagements, were helpless in the narrow island channels of the Pacific. Something had to change. That something was being built quietly in secret boatyards from New Orleans to New York, a weapon born of desperation and American ingenuity. The PT boat, or patrol torpedo boat, changed everything. 80 feet long, 20 feet wide, and made not of steel but laminated mahogany plywood, these craft were light, fast, and vicious. Powered by 3 Packard 1,500 horsepower engines, aircraft engines modified for the sea, they could reach speeds over 45 knots, faster than any warship or torpedo in existence. Each carried 4 21-inch torpedoes, a 20mm cannon, and a handful of 50-caliber guns, enough firepower to raise hell for 15 minutes, and then it was time to vanish or die. I first saw one in February 1943 at the Motor Torpedo Boat Training Center in Melville, Rhode Island. I'd just come off destroyer duty in the North Atlantic when the Navy called for volunteers for hazardous duty aboard experimental vessels. The recruiter wouldn't tell us what they were, only that casualty rates were expected to exceed 50%. Out of 200 volunteers, 40 were chosen. I made it because I could navigate by stars and handle small boats, thanks to my youth spent on Chesapeake Bay. When I first set foot on PT-164, I thought the Navy had gone insane. The hull was wood, in a war of armor and steel. The living quarters were so cramped that even sleeping required rotation. One man's bed became another's the moment he stood up. There was no armor save for thin sheet metal around the bridge. One lucky hit from anything larger than a rifle bullet would turn us into floating kindling. Then I met Lieutenant Commander Arthur Mac McPherson, and everything changed. He was 28, ancient by PT standards, and his eyes carried the weight of too many battles. He'd survived Pearl Harbor aboard the destroyer USS Shaw, fought at Midway, and volunteered for PT boats because, as he put it, "I'm tired of being a target. It's time to be the hunter." Mac understood what few officers did. PT boats weren't built to duel. We were maritime guerrillas, assassins of the sea, striking from the shadows and vanishing before the enemy could react. Our crew was a band of misfits who'd never have served together on a regular ship. Dutch Vanderberg, our exec, was a Yale math professor who could calculate torpedo firing angles faster than most men could read a slide rule. Chief motor machinist Carlos Charlie Mendoza had built racing engines in Los Angeles before the war. He could make our temperamental Packards purr like kittens or roar like lions. Radio man William Sparks Patterson came from the submarine service, trained to work in utter silence. Our torpedo man, Patrick Paddy O'Brien, treated his torpedoes like family. Each Mark 13 weighed over 2,000 pounds and cost as much as a house. Paddy would polish their propellers, whispering, "These beauties are the only reason the Japs will take us seriously. One shot, one kill, or we're just target practice." The rest of our 12-man crew included 2 gunners, an engineer, a cook who doubled as medic, and a few jack-of-all-trades seamen. We were a strange mix: farm boys, city kids, dropouts, and college grads, united by the same understanding. We'd volunteered for a mission most wouldn't survive. Training at Melville was merciless. The Navy had learned from early PT disasters that enthusiasm wasn't enough. We had to be faster, smarter, meaner. We practiced launching torpedoes while skipping across waves at 40 knots, learned to navigate by instinct when squalls turned night to blindness, and mastered the art of fighting dirty. Commander James Wild Jim Patterson, who ran the school, drilled it into us. The Japanese expect you to fight fair. Don't. They expect tradition. Don't. They own the dark. So make them fear it. By June 1943, we were ready, and we shipped out to the South Pacific. Our base at Rendova was nothing more than a hidden dock under palm leaves, a few huts, and a stench of diesel and decay. Artillery thundered in the distance from New Georgia, where Marines bled to seize the Munda airfield. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9, our unit, had 12 boats. Our job: stop Japanese reinforcements from reaching their garrisons. Simple on paper, lethal in practice. The islands were a labyrinth of reefs, volcanoes, and hidden enemy strongholds. The Japanese had seaplanes, coast watchers, and destroyer hunters dedicated to killing boats like ours. Our first patrol on July 5th was a disaster. We'd barely cleared Rendova Harbor when the heavens opened. Rain hammered us sideways, turning the sea into liquid glass. Radar was useless. Every return was static. We crept along at 15 knots, praying the engines wouldn't choke on seawater. Then, at 0300, a dark shape loomed dead ahead, the outline of a Japanese destroyer slicing through the rain. Before Mac could even give the order, searchlights snapped on. For one blinding instant, we stared into white fire. Then came the roar. Shells the size of milk jugs screamed past our bow. One hit the water so close that the explosion lifted our stern. Charlie threw the throttles forward, and the Packards screamed to life. The boat leapt like a wild animal, 40 knots, 50, tearing through the storm as geysers of water erupted around us. Tracer fire streaked overhead like burning arrows. One shell tore through the starboard side, shredding a fuel line. For a moment, we thought we'd burn alive. But Charlie, drenched and bleeding from a gash above his eye, crawled into the engine compartment and clamped it shut. We escaped into the darkness, engines coughing, hearts pounding. We hadn't fired a single torpedo. When dawn came, all 12 of our boats limped home. One was missing entirely. Another had to be beached, her crew rescued by native scouts. That night taught us something we'd never forget. The Japanese didn't fear the dark yet, but they soon would. 2 nights later, we went out again. This time, Mac had a plan. "No more charging in like fools," he said. "We hit them from the sides, strike once, and vanish." Our 3 boats, PT-164, 168, and 171, slipped out just after dusk. No lights, no radios, only the faint glow of phosphorescent plankton tracing our wakes. We reached our ambush point near Vela Gulf shortly after midnight. The sea was calm, too calm. Even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the mist, Dutch spotted movement. "Contacts, 3, bearing 120, he whispered. Through binoculars, I saw them. 3 Japanese transports escorted by destroyers, moving in a tight column. Their decks were packed with troops. Perfect targets. Mac raised his hand. "Steady." The first boat, PT-168, turned sharply to port, lining up for a torpedo run. The rest of us followed in a slow arc, silent shadows on the sea. When the lead transport crossed the firing line, Mac gave the word. "Fire 1, fire 2. Our torpedoes leapt from their tubes with a hiss of compressed air, vanishing beneath the waves. Seconds later, 2 more streaks of white foam marked the shots from PT-168. Then came the wait. 10 seconds, 20, 30, a heartbeat. The sea erupted. A column of flame burst from the first transport's midsection, rising 100 feet high. The second ship began to list immediately, its hull torn open like paper. Men screamed in the water as ammunition cooked off. "Hit confirmed!" Dutch shouted, his voice half disbelief, half triumph. The destroyers responded instantly. Searchlights snapped on, and the night became day. Their main guns opened fire, the thunder rolling across the water. "Hard to starboard!" Mac yelled. We turned sharply, engines howling. Shells exploded around us, geysers soaking the deck. Tracers sliced the air. One ripped through the radio mast, another shattered the windshield. But Mac didn't flinch. "Stay low and keep her steady." We zigzagged between plumes of water, each one close enough to taste. PT-168 took a near miss. Fragments tore through her aft gun mount, but she stayed in the fight. Then, out of nowhere, PT-171's torpedoes struck home. Another transport exploded in a blinding flash. The sea boiled with burning oil and debris. We'd done it. 3 transports, gone. 8,000 troops who'd never see Kolombangara. "Let's go home," Mac said quietly. We turned back toward Rendova, running blacked out at full speed. Behind us, the horizon glowed red. The Japanese destroyers still firing blindly into the night, hitting nothing but the ghosts we left behind. When we reached base, our fuel tanks were nearly dry. The men collapsed on the dock, laughing and shaking, too tired to speak. That night, the cook brought out what little whiskey we had, and Mac raised a tin cup. "To the ghosts of the Solomons," he said. "May they never see us coming." From that night on, the Japanese began calling us devil boats. Over the next months, we fought almost every night. Some missions were triumphs, others were nightmares. We saw boats vanish in sudden fireballs. We picked survivors out of burning seas, and sometimes we returned with empty seats, the silence of the missing louder than any explosion. But word spread. Across the Pacific, PT boats were rewriting naval warfare. Tiny craft striking fear into the largest navy in the world. We weren't heroes. Not then. We were tired, half-starved, and always soaked. Our uniforms rotted from salt and sweat. But each night, when we throttled up those Packards and the bow lifted, every man aboard knew one thing. We mattered. We weren't fighting for medals or glory. We were fighting for each other. By September 1943, the tide had turned. The Japanese began retreating through Vela Gulf. Their destroyers stopped running supply lines in daylight. The Tokyo Express was dying. But the war wasn't done with us yet. One night, a new mission came through. Something so dangerous even Mac hesitated before reading the orders aloud. It would be our final patrol together. The order came down on October 2nd, 1943. Intelligence had intercepted radio chatter. The Japanese were preparing one last desperate evacuation of Kolombangara. A destroyer squadron would sail that night to rescue their trapped troops. Our mission: intercept and stop them. 3 PT boats, 164, 165, and 167, would take up position near Vela Gulf, the narrow channel the Japanese destroyers had to pass through. If we could cripple even one ship, the rest would be forced to retreat. The odds? Terrible. But we didn't care. We'd spent too many nights watching our Marines bleed on those islands to let the enemy escape unpunished. At 2100 hours, we slipped from the dock. The moon was only a sliver, the sea flat and black as oil. I stood at my post beside the twin 50s, scanning the horizon. Mac leaned over the chart table, marking bearings. "Remember," he said, "we're ghosts tonight. Fire, then vanish. No heroics." "Aye, sir," Dutch answered, though we all knew he'd never run from a fight. For 3 hours, nothing. Just the hum of engines and the smell of exhaust. Then faint on the horizon. Flashes. Gunfire. "Contact! Range 3 miles!" Through the binoculars, I saw them. 3 Japanese destroyers running line abreast, their decks crawling with men. They were covering smaller craft, barges packed with soldiers. Mac's eyes narrowed. "That's our target." We throttled down, gliding into position. The radar painted a perfect path. The destroyers would pass right in front of us. "Prepare tubes 1 and 2, he ordered. The torpedo crew moved like ghosts, silent and efficient. The only sound was the sea licking the hull. "Fire 1, hissed Mac. A faint splash. "Fire 2. Both torpedoes slipped away, racing unseen through the dark. 10 seconds. 20. A blinding flash tore open the night. One destroyer's bow lifted, fire pouring from its forward magazine. The blast lit the sea in shades of orange and red. The other 2 destroyers instantly swung toward us, searchlights stabbing through the smoke. "Full throttle," Mac shouted. "Hard to port." We swung wide, engines screaming, zigzagging between geysers of exploding water. The air shook with thunder. "Return fire!" The twin 50s opened up, tracers streaking into the blinding white beams. I could see the enemy crew silhouetted on their deck, just shapes in the glare. "Keep firing!" Mac yelled. A shell exploded 50 feet off our stern. The shockwave slammed me into the deck. My ears rang, eyes stung from smoke and salt. I looked up. The sky was full of falling embers. "Engine 3's hit," Charlie shouted. "She's losing pressure." "Shut her down. Run on 2, Mac barked back. The boat slowed, just enough for the Japanese gunners to zero in. Another shell landed close, sending a wall of water crashing over the deck. Dutch stumbled but kept his hand on the wheel. Then, through the chaos, a miracle. PT-165 swooped in from the shadows, her guns blazing. The destroyers turned to engage her, buying us precious seconds. "Get us out of here!" Mac roared. We turned sharply, racing into a curtain of rain that had begun to sweep across the Gulf. The enemy's searchlights lost us in the downpour. For 10 minutes, we ran blind. Every man braced for the impact of a shell that never came. When the rain finally eased, the horizon behind us was glowing red. One Japanese destroyer was burning fiercely, her bow broken. The other 2 had vanished into the night. We'd survived. At dawn, we found PT-165 drifting near Kolombangara, one engine dead, her deck scorched. Her skipper, Lieutenant Evans, was wounded but alive. They'd sunk one of the destroyers and crippled another before escaping. 3 boats had faced the Imperial Navy and won, but not without cost. PT-167 had been hit amidships and exploded, taking her entire crew with her. The sea was still littered with debris when we passed through the area hours later. Mac stood at the bow, hat in hand, staring at the floating wreckage. No words, just silence. War doesn't hand out victories. It only lets you survive long enough to fight again. After that patrol, the campaign for the Central Solomons shifted. Larger ships and aircraft took over, and our squadron was reassigned to secondary duties: escort, reconnaissance, the occasional supply run to coast watchers. We still saw combat, but nothing matched those nights in 1943 when the world felt like it balanced on the edge of every torpedo we fired. By the time I rotated home in late 1944, I was 24 years old and felt 50. When people ask what I remember most, it isn't the battles or the explosions. It's the sound of those Packard engines roaring in unison. It's the smell of fuel and salt. It's the faces of the men standing beside me: Mac, Dutch, Charlie, Patty, men who risked everything for a cause most of the world would never fully understand. We were a strange breed, sailors who fought in boats made of wood, in seas ruled by steel, and somehow we won. Years later, I stood at a naval museum, staring at the restored hull of a PT boat. Tourists walked by, reading the placard, snapping photos. But as I reached out and touched the mahogany, I could still feel the vibration of those engines beneath my hands. The ghosts were still there, quiet, waiting. We called ourselves the Ghosts of the Solomons. And if you ever find yourself standing by the sea on a quiet night, listen closely. You might still hear the faint echo of 3 Packard engines racing through the dark, chasing shadows, fighting for dawn.